Thank you, Bob. Our next speaker is Leonard Evans, president of Science Serving Society. He'll be giving a talk on the dramatic failure of the U.S. traffic safety policy. Dr. Evans.
I'm a little concerned that this title could get me into trouble for divulging what is otherwise a closely guarded national secret. The presentation is available also on YouTube, which you can readily find from the homepage of my web, scienceservingsociety.com, and the link to the web works just fine, even if you type it in just one color. I'm going to start with a little history, namely the history of this presentation. It had its origins in my 2004 book, Traffic Safety, which contained a chapter titled The Dramatic Failure of U.S. Safety Policy. The book had many very positive reviews, but I'm going to quote from one of them here, and that was the review in the Journal of the American Medical Association. The reviewer said, but his chapter, The Dramatic Failure of U.S. Safety Policy, is the showstopper. And is this showstopper updated and expanded that I'm going to tell you about today. In the book, there is this figure which shows the evolution from 1979 to 2002 of total traffic deaths in the United States compared to in three comparison countries. The three comparison countries were chosen because of their similarities to the U.S. in language, customs, law, and just about anything you can think of. What is found is that in this period, total deaths in the United States declined by 16%. Now, this was heralded as a wonderful trend, and it reflected all the wonderful things that were being done to reduce traffic deaths in the U.S. But when we look at the three comparison countries, we find that deaths dropped by roughly 50%. So while the U.S. goes down 16%, the three comparison countries go down by 50%. What this means in numbers is that if the U.S. had dropped by the same percent as Great Britain, we would have been killing 15,800 fewer people in 2002 than we actually did. Or with the other countries, we can do the same calculation, so that we get an average of about 17,000 additional Americans were killed on our roads in 2002 because the U.S. could not match the safety performance of these three other countries. The U.S. had dropped very modestly, and the other countries had dropped by 50%, so one would expect that the other countries would find it harder to drop further, and the U.S. would find it easier to drop. So one could reasonably anticipate that this difference would disappear in time. Let's go forward 10 years. There's now a rich international data set which has data which we can use for 26 different countries. That is the United States compared to 25 others. This led to a paper in the American Journal of Public Health comparing the United States with the 25 other countries. The conclusion there was in a separate editorial titled 20,000 more Americans killed annually because U.S. traffic safety policy rejects science. So instead of getting better, it got even worse. Now I want to scoot forward to 2022. In 2020, 38,680 Americans died on our roads. And I want a little aside here. We know Americans don't walk. We don't walk anywhere. We jump in the car to go 2 blocks. But despite the fact that Americans don't walk, Yankee ingenuity is so great that we still manage to kill 6,700 pedestrians. Back to the main theme. Not only do we have a lot more data, but we've a better way to analyze it. And this better way has its origins in the evolution of the number of total traffic deaths in the United States versus time. In the early years of the 20th century, very few people were killed on our roads because there were very few vehicles. And then Model T, an assembly line, came along, rapid increase in vehicles, and corresponding to that rapid increase in vehicles was a rapid increase in the number of people killed on our roads. By traffic death or traffic fatality, I always mean somebody killed in a crash in which a vehicle with an engine was involved. So somebody who fell off their horse or got kicked by their horse is not included. And then the world was hit by cataclysmic events, the Great Depression, the Second World War. Fatalities bobbled up and down depending on availability of young men and tires and so forth. But when the war was over, we went into full production again, and the number of vehicles increased rapidly, and with that the number of traffic deaths. In 1972, the number of traffic deaths reached the all-time maximum, just under 55,000. Because that is a maximum, all other values must be lower. All countries have this same pattern. They reach a maximum, and after the maximum, they drift downwards. We're going to focus particularly on the period from the maximum to the most recent data. There is exactly the same data, just bigger scale. The latest value, 38,680. In the 48 years since reaching the peak, US fatalities have declined by 29%. We're going to use data for the same 26 countries as in my American Journal of Public Health paper, and we're going to use this different analysis approach, and that is because fatalities reach a maximum, we can define a simple ratio, fatalities in a given year divided by the maximum yearly fatalities. So it's a dimensionless, essentially no units, no arbitrary assumptions, depends only on fatalities. And we're going to plot how this ratio varies in time after the maximum is reached. We're going to plot it on a log scale and times 100, express it as a percent. So we're looking at the decline in deaths from the maximum as a percent decline. Now here's exactly the same data we had for the US, and we see that it did decline 29% below its maximum value. We're always going to look at the most recent value and compare it to the maximum value. The first other country I'm going to look at is Israel. The dotted line is 50%. So if you're below the dotted line, it means you've cut your traffic deaths by more than half since the maximum. And we see the US has dropped by 29%, Israel by more than 50%, New Zealand by more than 50%, Poland by more than 50%. And we've got 3 countries that declined by more than 50%, but did not decline by more than 70%. So these are the 3 worst performing countries. Now we're looking at countries that declined by more than 70%. That is, their most recent value is 30% or less than their maximum. Australia, Canada, Czech Republic, Greece, Ireland, Italy, and there are 6 countries that declined by 70%, but not more than 80%. South Korea declined by more than 80%, as did Finland, Hungary, Spain, Portugal, Great Britain, Norway, Belgium, Japan, Sweden, Netherlands. In total, 11 countries declined by more than 80%, but not more than 85%. France declined by more than 85%, as did Denmark, Switzerland, Germany, Austria. So the 5 countries declined by more than 85%. want to give a numerical example. In 1972, France had a maximum of 18,113 fatalities, same year that the United States achieved its maximum. But by 2020, France had 2,541 fatalities. In other words, it had just 14% of its maximum value, or, easier way to think of it, it had reduced its deaths by more than 85%. That's what all the data looks like. And you see the United States soaring above all the others. It's unique in ending 29% below maximum, whereas other countries are ending up 80 and 85% below their maximum. The key is there, and I mentioned that this presentation is on YouTube if you want to look at it in more detail. US fatalities declined by 29.1% from their all-time high. The poorest performing other country was Israel, and it declined by 56.6%. If the US deaths had declined by 56.6%, then the number of US deaths in 2020 would have been 23,717. That is 15,000 fewer than the 38,000 observed. In other words, by being just as good as the worst of the 25 countries, we would have saved 15,000 people on our roads. Not going to go through every country, so let's take the easy way out, namely the average of the 25 countries, which is 79.3%. So the average country reduced its deaths by 79.3% from its peak, compared to the US's 29.1%. If the US deaths had declined by 79.3%, then the number of US deaths in 2020 would have been 11,292. That is 27,000 fewer than the 38,680 observed. And this is the dramatic failure. Big question, why? And obviously there's not a simple specific answer, it's got to be a broad answer. And I would start by saying US policy does not just ignore science, it aggressively denies science. The most basic scientific findings in this subject can be summarized as follows. Vehicle factors are important, but less important than roadway factors. Roadway factors are important, but less important than driver performance factors. And by performance, I mean the driver's knowledge, skill, and abilities. Driver performance factors are important, but far less important than driver behavior factors. Now, US policy has been perfectly upside down. We put most emphasis on the things that all research says are of very minor importance compared to the really important things. The governmental body most responsible for traffic safety is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. I have, in my editorial previously mentioned, suggested it would be better named the National Vehicle Safety Administration. I further comment the net effect of NHTSA is to increase the number of road deaths. Now this must make me very popular in NHTSA, and I got to have a little aside here. I got this beautiful award from NHTSA. It's on my wall, and I have this recurrent nightmare that they're going to be two big burly FBI agents banging on my front door saying, "Give me back the award." The citation is in the field of vehicle safety. It's always vehicle. And of course my subject is traffic safety, not vehicle safety. The US, with the help of NHTSA, is inundated with toxic misinformation. You hear media broadcasts almost incessantly under the banner of safety stories like a million XYZ manufacturer vehicles were recalled because of a safety defect in something or other. No injuries are reported. Of what possible relevance to safety can this be to citizens in a nation in which more than 100 people are killed daily and around 3,000 injured. So my overall conclusion is if US safety policy matched that of an average motorized country, we would kill 27,000 fewer people on our roads annually.
I thank you for your attention, and if there's any argument, fist fight, or the like, I'm happy to indulge.
Yeah, oh, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, if anyone has any questions, I was going to take the liberty of asking the first question of Dr. Evans. That is that you've appeared to report all of this data in absolute numbers. I was wondering if those trends would still hold up if you looked at it or considered miles traveled.
Very good question, and the answer is I have indeed looked at it with other metrics. There are many metrics of safety, and one of them is the number of deaths per mile traveled. Surprisingly, only a few countries know how many miles are traveled. It's not all that trivial to estimate. In the US, they do it by the fuel economies of the vehicles and the amount of fuel they say it is consumed. And how do they get the average fuel economy of the vehicle? They divide the number of miles traveled by the, it's a bit cyclical. So I have looked at it for the countries that have it, and the effect is almost the same, a little bit less, but not worth making a fuss over. If you look at it, number of deaths per registered vehicle, for which every country counts the vehicles because they've got to tax them, so they all know how many vehicles they have. The effect is pretty much the same. And in my American Journal of Public Health article, the analysis is given for these other metrics. The US looks almost as bad, but not quite for the number of miles traveled, but per unit vehicle it looks just as bad. Question, I'm sure you heard, autonomous vehicles. I think the autonomous vehicle has the potential to generate a very sharp reduction in deaths. But bear in mind there are 1 billion vehicles in the world, and the guys are not just going to throw them away. They made major investments in them. So even in the US, it's going to take a very long time for autonomous vehicles to be a major portion of the fleet. And I think they're already probably safer than average drivers. And the big difference between computer systems and people is computer systems are subject to continuous improvement. Every time something goes wrong, you come up with a fix. Whereas people are well known to be no damn good, and they're that way, and it's fixed. There's every expectation in the future it'll just be as much no damn good as they are today. So I think it will make an improvement, but the world's 1 billion vehicles are going to be held tightly by those who've invested so much money in them. I would like to maybe make a comment. Why is the U.S. so fatally flawed in this? I grew up to adulthood in a nation outside the U.S., in the United Kingdom. So when I came to the U.S., I was kind of surprised that if somebody stubbed their toe on the sidewalk, the next thing they were talking about was lawyers. When I grew up, if you stubbed your toe, the next thing you were talking about was getting your mother to kiss your toe better. The legal racket, which in my kinder moments I refer to this way, plays a role dominant in the US that is unparalleled anywhere else in the world. And we get into safety through a lawyer, a disaster that happened in the U.S., Ralph Nader. This was at a time when fatalities were at over 55,000 per year, or almost 55,000 per year. And he focused the entire attention of the nation on the Corvair. And the allegation was, and it was unfounded, but the allegation was that maybe as many as 20 deaths were associated, and associated was a lawyer term, were associated with the Corvair, and that was over a period of many, many years. So we get 50,000 deaths occurring, and he's talking about a handful a year, and he's a lawyer, and his protege, Joan Claybrook, then moves into NHTSA, and the focus was entirely on vehicle defects, and these additional 27,000 people that are killed on the roads have nothing to do with vehicle technology, defective or otherwise. They have to do with speeding and things that are subject to public policy control, not individual control. I mean, if I watch traffic on a freeway, I've got to watch a long time before I see anybody doing over 100 miles per hour. And yet, almost every car sold in the US can travel more than 100 miles per hour. But we don't do it. It's not part of our national norm. We know that's very naughty. Whereas doing 85 miles per hour and a 70 mile per hour, that's okay. You know, that's kind of, sometimes you're unlucky, you get a ticket for it, but that's okay. Whereas it's not okay to smoke in an airport, something that in 1960 would have been thought absolutely inconceivable. So social norm, public policy, sensible speed limits, sensibly enforced, public support. The main thing that's likely to kill your kids is a sober driver driving a vehicle with lots of safety features on it. Hey, thank you very much.
That'll wrap up the Mobility History Committee section. Thank you.